Hi, assalamu alaikum and good evening. Thanks very much for being here this evening. My name is Miriam Francois-Jarrah and I will be emceeing tonight's event. Just a little bit before we get going about the City Circle, if I may. City Circle, of course, are the hosts and organisers of tonight's event. The City Circle is a completely volunteer-run charity established in 1999 to channel talent, particularly amongst Muslims, into strategic projects which help to put back into communities. The City Circle is an alternative space for open minds where individuals are pushed to think outside the box. It provides a safe space for communities to self-critically discuss and debate issues that concern them. It's open to all the public, all shades of Muslim, their term, not mine, and non-Muslim opinion, of course. The City Circle offers no doctrinal solution. A space to explore new ideas and a place to ask questions, to challenge and to be challenged. That is how they believe creative, confident and dynamic communities develop. So we'd like to encourage everyone to tweet tonight's event. So for all the Twitteratis amongst us, the hashtag is CC City Circle Jihadism, CC Jihadism. It should give a few people something to talk about on a Friday night. Now to the core of tonight's event. So recent developments, of course, in Syria, Iraq and elsewhere, notably in terms of the spread of the so-called Islamic State and a relaunch of US-backed air campaigns in the region, have once again brought the Middle East and jihadism Today's event will explore the root and genesis of this phenomena and the various geopolitical and economic forces at play enabling its startling. At the heart of the debate is the issue of defining the laws and ethics of jihad under Islamic law and the difference between traditional jihad and neo-Jihadism, with all the geo-strategic implications of those. In addition, the event will look to explore the factors that lead people to commit acts of terrorism. What are the synergies between counter-terrorism policy and counter-insurgency practices in the UK's domestic so-called war on terror? Our first speaker tonight of our very distinguished panel is Usama Butt. He's the founder and executive director of the Institute for Islamic Strategic Affairs. His academic interests mainly focus on the Islamic world and global security, US foreign policies of different Islamic governments and emerging global powers, inter-Islamic and intra-Islamic conflicts, security sector reform, disarmament, demobilization and reintegration, civil-military relations, conflict transformation, peace building, post-conflict reconstruction, jihadism, as you might tell, and intelligence studies. He's conducted field research in the Middle East, North Africa, and West Africa, South Asia, on conflict resolution, humanitarian analysis, and conflict resolution. I think we've said that one. He's been involved directly and indirectly in reconciliation efforts and has advised governments and international organizations and groups. So just to give you an idea of how tonight will unfold, each speaker will speak for 8 to 10 minutes. We'll then put a few questions to them, or I shall put a few questions to them. I'll then open it up to the audience and hopefully we can get a few questions from the floor. So get thinking. So with that, I would like to hand over to Usama for the first talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hi, thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Okay. I would just like to start with a brief introduction of what we do at IISA. We started about 3 years ago. The idea was to provide alternative policy analysis to the governments, to the regional governments, to public, just simply pointing out the knowledge of the knowledge. How do you know what you know? Giving ground-up perspectives of what actually was happening rather than what we think was happening. And in my very limited experience, the basics of the conflicts are often missed. When we go into conflicts such as Afghanistan and Iraq, we don't ask the questions, we don't know how we know. The knowledge of the knowledge is built on false premises. Doesn't really reflect what is happening on the ground, but it's selective in interpretation. It comes from certain perspective. So the idea was just simply to give a kind of ground-up perspective of what was happening in the Muslim world, And based on that, produce a kind of alternative policy analysis that befits the regional and international governments, INGOs, NGOs, and different groups within. Within that, we have different programs that are reflected. For instance, we have a program on security sector reform, how to transform the security sector, intelligence, military, etc. And how to disarm militias and put them back into society. We started that 2 years ago. Our just main idea is to look up how Islamic values, cultures, a local tradition can be used and integrated into that system, which is clearly not working. We have the armies in Afghanistan, Iraq, for instance, created on a Western model, turned out to be totally incompetent and turned out to be much more sectarian, ethnic. So we need to have alternative modus operandi for operating. My colleague Tasia here, she leads the program. And similarly, we have looking at holistically how Western Horn of Africa, militancy, organized crime, and resources impact on the regional and global security. Luis here is leading the program, and again, we started this program, Neo-Jihadism, which I'll come to later, that looks at basically a different perspective. It's outgoing kind of. The paradigms of jihadism has changed. I mean, we've been looking at the jihad through methodologies of what it was about 12 years, 15 years ago, and since lots has happened on the jihadist landscape. But I'll come to that in a bit. And also the other aspect of our think tank, the creation of think tank, was to map out strategic dynamics of the Muslim world. I mean, we have programs like Russia and China, resurgence of Russia and China and its impact on the Muslim world, which Tim is leading, and which is basically looks at not just now what is the rise of China, Russia doing on the Muslim world, but in 20, 30 years down the future, how it will impact when the global powers are changing. And also we have colleagues Tariq and Zaim who are working on Afghanistan in transition. We've been working on that program 2 years. And with me, Sam here is working on Neo-Jihadism program. Well, the Neo-Jihadism program, the reason to introduce that term was just simply a report we wrote last year on Afghanistan, and we had to write about 50 pages report. It's on our website. And that got me thinking. I was writing the report and got my colleagues thinking at the same time that understanding Taliban and understanding jihad that it was kind of outdated or looked at through either Western perspective or very nationalist perspective of whichever government the certain jihadist organization was operating in. And that sort of got us thinking that, look, there was something going on. I mean, on a jihadist landscape itself, there's been a lot of impact. There's been Arab Revolution, there's been a global war on terror, there have been crisis after crisis, which has changed the jihad as we perceive as a war, or it has changed the organization as we perceive as a war. So that sort of led us to introduce that term, neo-jihadism. What neo-jihadism is something very unique to the 21st century. It's something that has emerged and is a direct and indirect result of the many phenomena and many things that have happened within the Muslim world, including the war on terror, the Arab Revolution, as I mentioned, the Syrian war, the Libyan war. And of course, if we are always analyzing how it is impacting, how the jihadists are impacting, or the jihadist trends are impacting on Western and regional security, but we never really look at how those phenomena have actually impacted on jihad itself. Jihad, as many of you know, is literally means struggle. And it comes in different forms. Well, we are talking here particularly jihad with Saif, the jihad through sword or armed jihad. It is a theory of war within the Muslim world that's been prevalent for the last 1400 years. Let's not beat about the bush. It is what it is. And Muslims have used it throughout the history. Not just Muslims used it, but non-Muslims have used it. If you look back, Mehdi used it in the campaign against the British Empire. Kaiser Wilhelm used it, the German Kaiser, in sort of supporting the Ottoman against British. American used it in Afghanistan, which Abdullah can speak much more. And then, and there are different governments. Algerian used it, for instance, in their fight, which was a very secular fight, but again, it was jihad. So jihad is a theory of war. We're talking about theories of war and theory of peace. Just as the West have a theory of war, so does the Muslim world had a theory of war, and that is what jihad was. But what we're seeing is a new shift to jihadism, and that is what we're calling a jihadist, neo-jihadism. It is unique to 21st century. It is much more sectarian. It uses sectarian language to service, and it is neither national nor it is transnational. So like Al-Qaeda had its transnational sort of image, which was befitting and was a very defensive strain of jihad. This is more offensive strain of jihad, and it operates on the region on very, very purely militarily basis. And finally, it is not a very theological or ideological grounded movement. It is much more a kind of military machine. And if you look at the leading jihadist organizations, which we've mentioned in the report, the IS, Boko Haram, ETIM, for instance, you see that they don't have any ideological depth. By that I mean they don't have ideologues supporting them. But if you look at the other organization, Al-Qaeda, when it started, had very strong ideological depth. So these are military organization. Of course, they are political, and of course we will come to politics and religion and the merger of this. But they're purely military organization for them, and their methodology and their operations, anything justifies. They sort of combine whichever kind of terrorism they can to simple military strategy and tactics. So the understanding of neo-jihadism is important because it's changing the way we look at the war, how it is. The leading neo-jihadist organization, in my opinion, is obviously the one we're discussing. It is the IS, Islamic State. It started off, sort of created and mutated rather from Al-Qaeda in Iraq. It's the direct result of the American and British intervention, or the coalition intervention, whichever you want to call it. And it's less, if you want to look at the rationality behind the irrationality, you have to look at its emergence, its mutation, and its evolution. IS is a direct result. The methodology that it adopts, the cruel tactics that it involves, is the direct result of what it really, of the ground realities, basically. If you look at the Shia death squad, if you look at sign after sign, the West has clear and present signals to do something in Iraq. Anbar Sunni awakening, and after that, this Sunni protests that they were crushed by Maliki government. There was trouble in Fallujah that was happening. There was trouble brewing in Anbar, and then the whole Syria thing. We simply chose, in the Western term, a kind of reactive strategy. We did not have a very proactive strategy to do things on it. The result is IS, result is neo-jihadism, and result is basically what we are seeing, kind of irrational type of warfare, very unique to the 21st century, but has a very much rationality behind, in the sense because it represents the ground reality, but it also in a sense that, when you are creating a kind of irrational violence, you're doing that to out-radicalize your own people. And I can quote a lot of people. I've been working very close with people who are actually struggling against Daesh on the ground. But as I said, neo-jihadism is a sectarian warfare. It is about sectarian, it's about Sunni-Shia fight. And this counter-strategy that the West and the coalition is adopting nowadays, that you've heard probably yesterday, Philip Hammond said statement, and you've heard that the American CENTCOM said that they've killed 6,000 soldiers, the 6,000 troops from IS. The strategies, I think, in my opinion, the water is already over the bridge. It is a Sunni-Shia fight. People are not going to, or people are not prone to. If you talk to a Syrian, if you talk to an Iraqi, what they see is it's a Shia Iran supported by Shia Hezbollah, supported by Shia Iraqi army. and supported by the Shia President Assad, who's killing Sunnis, and Sunni blood to them comes cheap. So frankly, in my opinion, the organization that it represents is not, the organization are not represented. Well, neo-Jihadism, let me rephrase, neo-Jihadism does not, cannot be defined by the organizations. The organizations can be defined by neo-Jihadism. And the strategies that the West is adopting, and if I just want to sort of, I want to conclude, I can talk more later on this. In tackling neo-Jihadism, first of all, we don't understand what jihadist mutation or evolution has been. If we don't understand that, we don't understand how it is impacting on the societies, why it is attracting a lot of people. Then we don't understand. If we don't understand the basic, as I said in the very beginning, how do we know what we know? We're not going to really get the policies right. So in the fight against IS or a neo-jihadist sector, Boko Haram or so on, we need a holistic policy. But the problem is, you cannot fight war after war. I mean, the US was engaged in NATO. It hasn't really finished. The IS started. You can't do anything Boko Haram because you're overstretching IS. And again, there's Libya going on. So you need holistic policies. You need to understand what is happening. You need to understand what neo-jihadism is. You need to think outside the box, basically, because if you don't, if you keep on going on the paradigms that they were, before the war on terror, lots have happened in the regions, lots have impacted on the jihadist landscape. It is not the jihad as we understood it, or as Abdullah will speak, can say much better than I do, in 80s and 90s, what actually represented the spirit of jihad. It is something more different. It is neo-jihadism.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Usama, for that. Certainly think it's raised quite a few questions for me, but I will hold those for the end of the session. Our next speaker is Abdullah Anas. Abdullah Anas is a former senior Afghan Mujahideen commander who lived in Afghanistan during the peak of the Afghan Jihad against the Soviet Union. He is also the son-in-law of Abdullah Azzam, who Professor Esposito, in a class I took many years ago now, described as the father of modern jihad, or the father of jihad gone global, I believe. He's considered certainly to be a leading figure in modern jihadism, and certainly central to, I suppose, we would consider a reworking of the concept of jihad. Abdullah Anas now advises different think tanks and organizations on issues relating to jihadism and regional stability. So I look forward to hearing from you, Abdullah, a little bit more about what we've touched on this neo-jihadism and the new directions and differences with the conception of jihad that preceded it.
Thank you very much. I don't know when Usama got in touch with me to participate in this presentation on this event, I did hesitate whether to come or not because of the value of to get to know each other or to listen. Sorry. I did hesitate for one thing. When you talk about such very sensitive, complicated topic, where politics and Quran and Hadith and security and history all comes together, and you are trying to explain a topic such through a language is not your first language. So I found it a little bit hard, because jihad, even if you go and walk into the streets of Algeria or Jordan or Islamabad and ask for jihad, even ordinary Muslims doesn't know what's the final definition of jihad, let alone a Western living in Oxford Street. So that is very, very, very difficult. You need PhDs and masters for people. But that doesn't mean we should give up. If just we compare it, I tried to discuss it with some friends a few days ago. I said, if you go back 50, 60, 70 years ago here in Europe, and if you could imagine the surprise of the people working in Heathrow seeing someone going to Mecca for Hajj. Completely, what is that? Now, after 40, 50, 60 years, now British Airways signing and Hajj, and Air France do the same, Lufthansa, and people having the Ihram, Wuzu, in Charles de Gaulle or in Heathrow. It's become part of the culture, part of the society. It's not something strange. The same for the fasting. You can see now the leaders, presidents of prime ministers of in Europe, United States, they have a number of Muslims. They forced diplomatically to say congratulations, Eid Mubarak every Eid. So now we are dealing with this. I am sure after 10, 15, 20 years, the word jihad or a mujahid will be part of our media, part of our academia, part of the culture. But the challenge is how, I don't know, I never imagined myself in 83, 84, 85, someone fighting against the Red Army with Ahmad Shah Massoud in the trenches. In 2014, I'm sitting here in Oxford Street talking with people. So I don't know what will happen in the future, but this is our fate. We have to face it. I just gave an interview to Le Journal du Dimanche, the weekly newspaper in France, just 10 days ago, and the journalist asking me, do you think the Islam will take all Europe? That's simple people thinking. For sure, for the Westerns, have something in their mind, in their memory, they hate it, they don't like it to be repeated, which is like the futuhat. They don't like to hear the word futuhat. I don't know how to say the futuhat in English. Conquest. And also, if you ask me, ask my father from Algeria or Egypt, also we hate to see the once again see the colonialism or see the crusade wars. So I said, are we obliged to stay prisoners of the past, or we can shape our own future? So these meetings, these kinds of meetings, these kinds of topics, we are building the new steps, how to shape it. Yes, it's very complicated now because the media wants just the headlines. And when you go deeper in the article, you find nothing concrete to understand, because the purpose of the media, the channel, or the TV, or the satellite, they want to sell and gain their audience. And it's just for headlines. Maybe for the security, for what they have their own measurements. For politicians, maybe for the elections. But for academia, for to understand deeply, so for these principles, for these reasons, I do try to participate in some meetings like this, because how to understand, even as I said before, an ordinary Muslim, I can make a jihadi in 5 minutes. Really, I'm serious, can do. In 5 minutes, just reading, وَمَا لَكُمْ لَا تُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَالْمُسْتَضْعَفِينَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَالْوِلْدَانِ. I can send my son to fight today and send وَقَاتِلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ كَافَّةً كَمَا يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ كَافَّةً. So this is from the Quran, and the Quran is in my side. At the same time, I can say you cannot force people to be Muslim, as we mentioned here, from the Quran itself. La ikraha fi din. You cannot force someone to convert to your deen, to your Islam. So this is from the Quran, and this is from the Quran. And when it's not read in the right context, we just heard last week or 10 days, General Sisi in Egypt, because he's not a mufassir, he's not a scholar, he's not a thinker, he's not an expert, he's a general, came onto the stage politically, and he said it. I didn't get this deen, this Islam, even he's a Muslim, saying what kind of this Islam, this deen, this Quran, 1.5 billion, they are planning to kill 7 billion. This is what he understood. So that's why if the confusion is happening to a Muslim, born in a Muslim country, let alone someone in France or in New York. So that's why I wanted to mention this is a step, as the Arab expression saying, مشوار الألف يبدأ ب1 mile, a journey of 1,000 steps, we start from one step. I will put it like this, events talking without being under the investments of politics or security or the commercial media. Like just we want to talk, we want to express. I didn't know when I passed here after the assassination of Sheikh Abdullah Azzam in November '89. He used to come every year to Britain and goes to United States because the conference of the Muslims used to take place in this month, in December. So after his assassination, in the services table, the board decided to send me to replace him. I came to London here, stayed 2 days. I never imagined to stay in this country, but I left the war, and then for the circumstances, conditions, I found myself here. And that's why, in my opinion, I will finish with this word, it's just a picture started now getting shape for the future. We have time to not to repeat the history, what happened, the history. Even today, if you go to some books 800 years ago, if you open Bab Adam Akhd al-Mushaf ila Bilad al-Kufr, this is the one the students, to be a Mawlawi, to be a alim, you have to read these topics. And then one of the topics, you are not allowed to take the Quran, the book, to Bilad al-Firanja, to Europe. Why? But that scholar, 700 years, doesn't know the best shop, the best print of the book now, it's now here in London. So all these contexts, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, we read the books. If I want to know, I just was invited to actually TV channel, sorry, just the last name, asking me the same question. I said, we need Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah of 2014. We need Abu Hanifa of 14. Because if I want to ask Ibn Taymiyyah or Ibn Qayyim, they are scholars. We love them. They are our shuyukh. Nothing, no doubt. But if I ask as a Muslim, Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, I'll open his book, Iqtidat Sirat al-Mustaqim, or Salim al-Maslul, whatever of his books. What are the question, Muslims, what should do with the Security Council? You will never find the answer there, because he doesn't know what's the Security Council, what is G8, what is UN. So that's why the confusion is not only in the minds of the Westerners, it's only in Muslims. So that's why I didn't like to simplify it and put it just jihad against infidels, or from Europeans or Americans, we are here to fight against terrorism. It's not that simple. It's more deeper than that. So we should take our time, 5 years, 10 years, academia, social media, meetings, fatwa, everything. Inshallah, we will reach. Sorry.
Thanks very much, Abdullah Anas. So our next speaker, Dr. Rizwan Sabir, is a specialist in counterterrorism, insurgency and militant Islam. Having held research posts at SOAS, the University of Leiden and City University of New York, Rizwan's current research examines the influence of military doctrine on the British war on terror. His research was and is currently an assistant professor in social science at Edge Hill University. He's also a top bloke. I can recommend. So let's
that, Miriam. Assalamu alaikum and good evening, everybody. I want to start by thanking City Circle for inviting me here today, and all of you for turning up on a Friday evening. The fact that you're spending your Friday evening part listening to me is proof that you have to pay for your sins in this life. Sinning aside, though, I don't have very long to speak, so I'm going to crack on and dive right into what I want to say. I want to discuss one area, and I want to explain how the threat from militant Islam is being perceived and understood by the government and policymakers. Why, you may ask, is this issue important? Because unless the government recognizes what ultimately drives militant Islam, solutions to the problem of militancy and violence simply can't be formulated. So let's get to it. How is militant Islam understood by the government as we presently speak? It's perceived by the government and policymakers to be a new form of terrorism. The threat, they argue, is different from the old terrorism associated with the likes of Nelson Mandela's ANC, or Yasser Arafat's PLO, or the Basque separatist movement ETA, or the IRA, or the Tamil Tigers, just to stick another name in there. It's different to old terrorism in 4 different ways, and I want to work through them all, through all 4. Firstly, global militant Islam is considered to be a networked and horizontally structured movement, not hierarchical. This means that the global militant Islamic movement has no strictly defined command or control or leadership, unlike the old terrorism associated with the national liberation struggles of the 20th century. Because there is no leadership or no command, the actions of militant Islamic organizations are largely unaccountable. Now, governments, policymakers, and law enforcement and intelligence agencies therefore consider this lack of leadership to make militant Islam as it currently stands a more dangerous and threatening opponent that they've ever confronted in their history. The second point on how it's different. Militant Islam is considered to be a transnational movement. Now, I know Usama has mentioned some issues to do with the fact that it's not a transnational movement, but I maintain that it is a transnational movement, especially if we look at the likes of Al-Qaeda and their attacks somewhat before 9/11, but mostly after. So militant Islam, according to government policy, is considered to be a transnational movement, as opposed to being limited to one state or one territory. That's of course changing with ISIS, but largely it's transnational. The government therefore believes that you cannot confront militant Islam as it presently stands purely through military force. As a result, military or hard power, as they call it, must be accompanied by soft power. The PREVENT strategy, which many of you may have heard of up until date, is exactly this. It's a counter-ideological strategy that seeks to challenge radical ideas and opinions here at home and abroad throughout the Islamic and Muslim world. The third way in which militant Islam is considered to be different from the old terrorism is Militant Islam, or new terrorism as the government policy calls it, is considered to exploit the benefits that modern technology, information and communications bring, along with globalization. So, for example, cheap Ryanair flights to wherever you're flying to, or open borders is one example of the alteration that the modern or globalization has led to. Also, communications and social and new media, Twitter, Facebook, Kick, whatever they're called, can be used for propaganda purposes. In the name of confronting militant Islam, governments and intelligence agencies, as you may have heard from the news, are pushing for increased surveillance of the internet and shifting their focus largely to cyber warfare and cyber counterinsurgency activities. Fourthly, and most importantly, the new terrorism thesis, or government and policy at the moment, considers militant Islam to employ violence for religious and ideological reasons, unlike the old terrorism, which used violence for political purposes. So the targeting of civilians, it's claimed, is not strategically motivated. Militant Islam is not about using force in order to bring matters onto a political agenda. It isn't a reaction to historically rooted Western control and influence over Middle Eastern and Arab and Islamic nation states. It's most certainly not a response to avoidable foreign policy disasters that Western powers have been involved in. No, militant Islam, it's claimed by the government and policymakers, is a movement that employs violence by trying to cleanse the world of non-believers, or as they would on Twitter call kuffar, in a bid to ensure that Islam could dominate the world and the globe, or the globe. In other words, or in simple words, it's a religiously motivated movement that's trying to act out an apocalyptic vision inspired by religious ideology through extreme violence and brutality. Now, of course, some of you may recognize there are a number of problems with drafting counterterrorism legislation that is based on this somewhat orientalized understanding of militant Islam. Now, these problems can be summarized into 3 points. One, by claiming that militant Islam is violent for the sake of being violent, perpetuates war and conflict and prolongs it. Why? Is that better? Why? Because it essentially paints an image of militant Islamic organizations, or the opponent in this case, as being irrational and nihilistic. It places militant Islam beyond the realm of reason. It makes some form of settlement or negotiation with this movement impossible. Fighting, in other words, becomes the only option for the state, and remaining in a perpetual state of insecurity becomes an inevitable reality. The second problem with drafting policies that say militant Islam is networked and leaderless creates an impression that militants are everywhere and anywhere waiting to launch their strikes and attacks without any notice being given. This means, in order to find the bad apples or find the militants who are hiding amongst us, blanket policies which criminalize large segments of the Muslim community and label them as potential terrorists or potential recruits to a global militant Islamic insurgency are implemented in the name of protecting national security. This, of course, creates moral panic, and in the name of keeping people safe, governments continue to erode civil liberties, human rights, and due process. They allow fear and hysteria to dictate their actions as opposed to reason and evidence. So in order to reduce the risk from militant Islam, the government and policymakers firstly must recognize why groups and individuals claiming to represent a group, whether it's Al-Qaeda or whether it's ISIS or Islamic State, use violence against Western democracies and their interests abroad. A good place to start would be to recognize that whilst ideology and religion, of course, may give legitimacy and justification for violence, it's not the cause of the violence. Religious ideology only takes you so far without a conducive political environment. Therefore, it's ultimately politics that drives militant Islam, not religious ideology. New terrorism is therefore not as new as the government and policymakers and law enforcement and intelligence agencies so claim. Instead, recognizing the very fact that counterterrorism is about politics would make counter-terrorism policy less counterproductive. In fact, it may even do what it's meant to do, and that's keep us safe. And trust me to mess up the order on the pages as well. Only I could do such a thing. So basically the point of, the hitch now I'm going to have to fix live, and this is extremely difficult to do. So basically the point that I was trying to make was that counter-terrorism is counterproductive, and the reason it is because the government's current counter-terrorism strategy is based on anticipating or understanding potential threats. So governments are basically leaving the realm of empirical evidence and basing their policy on perceived threats, imagined threats. We're leaving the threat of evidence and we're entering the realm of imagination. And I'm telling you now, in this realm where your imagination dictates policy, the threat of militancy is endless, and the list of suspects is never-ending. This is a supremely counterproductive way, as I've already said, of dealing with militant Islam. Why, you may ask? Because criminalizing people that may potentially become violent, they draw inward. Their existing grievances, their sense of alienation is reinforced. It therefore makes them more susceptible to actually internalizing militant, or what has been used today, jihadist ideas and ideology and values, not less. Counterterrorism policy, in other words, does not reduce the risk of terrorism as it currently stands. It perpetuates it. It makes us less safe. So, back to the correct page now. New terrorism, as the government claim in their policy, is actually not as new as they claim. If they recognized that the main driving factor behind militant Islamic violence is politics as opposed to religious ideology, they may actually be able to do what it says in the policy documents, and that's keep us safe. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rizwan. So, just listening to our panel, it just seems like there's confusion. It's just so many levels. There's confusion amongst Muslims over the very definition of jihad. I mean, we've heard various speakers discuss it, but I'm still not clear myself on what we mean when we use the term, or perhaps different people mean very different things by it. I think there's also a lot of confusion over who gets to define the very concept of jihad, or perhaps widen its remit, which wars are considered to be legitimate and which aren't. And of course, as we've just heard, there's confusion within the government over who should be targeted by counter-terrorism strategies and how. When the source of the threat is unclear, the risk of widening the circle of suspicion is very real. And critically, there's a very central question, which I think is at the core of this, which is whether what Rizwan has called militant Islam is ideological or political in its central motivation. Because, of course, the solutions that we would imagine flow differently depending on what we identify as the source. So I wanted to put a few questions to the panel. We heard in our first talk from Usama about this sort of timeline of neo-Jihadism and this emergence from Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And I suppose when you're talking about neo-Jihadism, you're talking specifically about the so-called Islamic State.
Well, not just so-called Islamic State, but the phenomenon of the organizations. As I said, the four fundamental principles or four parameters that we have. How much the war on terror impacted on a certain organization? How did it react to it? How did it mutate? What became its methodology and operations? What is sphere of influence and sphere of operations? What we see is neo-jihadists, not just the IS, but Boko Haram as well, for instance. And if you go into our report, on website, we've actually identified about 20-30 pages of which organizations are neo-jihadists, which are not, which should be monitored closely. So they are regional. They're not neither national, nationalist jihadists used to be Hamas or Hezbollah.
What about Al-Shabaab? Where would you qualify
Al-Shabaab? Are closely worth monitoring. They are regional in a sense that they want to impact they are operating on a regional level. But the mutation or the lack of ideology or the ideological base and the lack of sectarianism doesn't really put them on a neo-jihadist landscape as of yet.
Okay.
And it's not a fixated thing. This is all in evolution, and we are just simply monitoring it. We're just trying to present a sort of new paradigm to understand how jihadist landscape has changed, and what you need to really think out of the box, how you need to think differently, rather than, these are all transnational jihadis.
Could you possibly outline specifically what the differences are then between neo-jihadism and sort of what you might call the classical jihadi movement, and specifically some of the more famous movements we might know? So is Al-Qaeda neo-jihadi?
No,
or is
Al-Qaeda is not, and the reason Al-Qaeda is fighting with neo-jihadist movement is purely because Al-Qaeda is a transnational movement. It is very defensive. It started out as a defensive mechanism against the West, as it saw at the time. It operates transnationally. It's very much ideologically bound. It has a lot of ideologues behind it who stayed on in Pakistan, Afghanistan, or even before. So its modus operandi is quite different in terms of, even it tried to shun out, for instance, Musab al-Zarqawi, for instance, the predecessor of Anis. Today, Jabhat al-Nusra and its affiliates are fighting against neo-jihadists. So it is quite different in its ideology, it's quite different in its methodologies, it's quite different in operations, and it's the sort of sphere of influence, or the way it sees as what jihad means. What these neo-jihadists are, they're quite different. They don't care about, they don't necessarily want to establish a khilafah. What they want to carve out is a chunk of territory for them, like Boko Haram or IS for this instance. They want to control that territory. They want to have a military presence. They're much more military savvy. They don't have ideological depth. They don't have any ideologues. I mean, IS may have controlled into Mosul, Tikrit, or going to Dar az-Zor, and in these places in Syria. But when it comes to an ideological depth, they're actually threatening the people like Maqdisi and so on to be killed. And they are operating on a regional level. I mean, they're using both the combinations of terrorism and with a kind of militant. And again, a clear distinction between Al-Qaeda and neo-jihadists. Al-Qaeda operates through very small cells. It is almost hidden. It is very underground kind of movement who wants to do a spectacular attack. I mean, neo-jihadists are not. They are very offensive in a way. They operate quite differently.
So what do you make, for example, in the context of the recent attacks in France, that we have two of the men pledging allegiance to Al-Qaeda and a third demonstrating his allegiance to the Islamic State? So, but all seem to have been coordinated. So how do you explain
Al-Qaeda in Arabian Peninsula is not a neo-jihadist movement, because it hasn't really operated since his merger with the 2009 merger between Al-Qaeda in Yemen and Al-Qaeda in Saudi. And it's against a very defensive mechanism, took its inspiration and tried to attack the far enemy rather than the close enemy. The interesting bit, of course, is for me was, and we were discussing with my friend here, after the Paris attack, was whoever was responsible for Paris attack somehow wanted to change or dictate a change in French foreign policy. I'm not going into conspiracy theory here. I'm just saying the impact of it, and the way it was sophisticated, the way it was coordinated, the way it was carried out. And then you have two people who leave their ID cards behind, and then you have confusion among the peoples. One is pledging allegiance to IS, the others to AQIP, and then AQIP first comes and denounces, then it says, well, we are behind it, then it says, yes, we are behind it finally. On a very superficial level, it basically shows you the confusion within jihadism. The reason neo-jihadists attract is because of their military offensive strategies, because of the territorial claim they seek, and their ability to hold and control this. So that's the key difference between the neo-jihadists and traditional jihadist movements, whether they were national, or Hamas or Hezbollah or their like, or whether they were transnational. Okay. So there are clear distinctions to be made. and nobody's studying or looking into those distinctions. And if you don't, then basically you end up as Rizwan was saying, and through Western perspective, they're all militant Islamists, and therefore they're all the same. But there is a lot happening on the ground.
Thank you. Well, one of the other questions was to the two panelists closest to me, so to Abdullah and Rizwan, actually. I was wondering whether you might disagree, Dr. Sabir, with Abdullah Anas over the sort of centrality of religious motivations. I mean, Abdullah, we heard you talking about, you can quote Quran and radicalize somebody within 5 minutes. I mean, is it that simple? Is it just about Quran, or how central is religion really in your mind to a motivating factor? Because I think this is sort of key to much of the debates here over the counterterrorism strategy and who is responsible ultimately for countering terrorism. If the problem is a religious one, then of course Muslim community leaders and thinkers and shuyukh then have a responsibility. If it's more a political factor, and we're hearing sort of similarities with other politically motivated crimes, then the Muslim community's remit is much more limited. So I was just wondering if both of you could perhaps engage in that area.
Simply in my opinion.
Sorry.
Simply in my opinion, if I would rethink about it, for example, the saying of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Al-jihadu madin ila yawm al-qiyamah." Jihad.
You're on the wrong place there.
Yeah, thank you. We got the point. Thank you.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I've got this. Thanks. Perhaps we can get you to move slightly closer to the mic, and perhaps any comments could be kept to a minimum. Thank you.
الجهاد ماض إلى يوم القيامة. يعني الجهاد will continue till the hereafter. So that's why it's a duty of maybe the governments, counter-terrorism, but it's also duty number one, the duty of the sheikhs. This is because the confusion is coming. If you come to a mujahid for someone thinking he's defending his religion, he's breaking the humiliation. This is what is in his mind. I remember when the Soviets used to say for Ahmad Shah Massoud and Jalaluddin Haqqani and to Abdullah Azzam in the radio, the Ashrar terrorists, the equal word of terrorists. French used to call the Mujahideen in Algeria Fallaga, which is the equal word of terrorists. For the other side, when you call someone in Algeria, if you call Ali Lapointe or Arbi bin Hidi in Algeria or Ahmad Shah Massoud in Afghanistan, you are a terrorist, that means he's the best mujahid. Because my enemy calling me this. So that's why it's not going to solve the problem just slogans in the air. That's why it's a duty of a Muslim. It's more challenges to Muslims, to sheikhs, than the governments. So that's why jihad will continue till the hereafter. But the challenge, which conditions, what circumstances, the priority of the siyasa shar'iyya, I don't know how to say it, the siyasa shar'iyya, whether to do something is beneficial or harmful. This authority of a scholar to put it on order, in order as Islamic center, an expert, a scholar. This is what is happening. The challenge is it's not anymore in the hand of this group of people. It's just someone angry, and then he even doesn't need to ask any Islamic center or a sheikh. His sheikh is the sheikh internet. And then So that's why, sorry, it's more deeper to say it in a few words. Yes, so.
Just to kind of pick up on that point that Abdullah was talking about when he was saying that the sheikhs have a responsibility to kind of put forward arguments and counter-arguments and all the rest of it. This is recognized as an official kind of policy within the PREVENT program especially, where individuals who will have a resonance with an audience, who will use Islamic language, Islamic narratives, Islamic ideas in order to appeal to the emotions of a person who is considered to be susceptible to becoming involved in violence. So this kind of using Islamic scholars and thinkers in order to persuade people to behave in a particular way is already a part of the strategy. Now, there are a number of individuals who are quite credible within the Muslim militant or political Islamic community that have been trying to kind of challenge some of the ideas that are coming out, especially of Iraq and Syria. Some names off the top of my head, Abu Qatada is one of them, Mozambique is another one. They're the two that come into mind right now. But both have been quite significant in terms of trying to work for the release of hostages, for example, that were taken in Iraq and Syria. But the reality is that there is an extremely, I need to be careful with the word I use here, let's say significant element within policy circles that does not want any kind of formal engagement to take place with anybody who believes that believes Islam has an ability to govern socially, economically, politically, or ideologically, right? So if you are non-violent, but you believe that Islam has an ability to govern society, then you are a part of the problem. And for that reason, the government is not willing to engage with you. So Muslims are speaking up in order to challenge certain movements who are using religion as a justification, as an excuse. But ultimately, there is also a challenge to that specific segment in policy or within the scholastic Muslim community that is saying, don't engage with these people. So yeah, that's that point basically. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Just two questions, and I'll open it up to the floor. One was another one to Abdullah Anas, really. I was just wondering what you think. I mean, you've spoken about religious authority and about the problems with, people who are looking up for that authority on the internet rather than seeking out, I suppose, more legitimate or grounded sources of authority. But and you mentioned earlier on Imam Abu Hanifa. I was just wondering what you think Imam Abu Hanifa would make of Abdullah Azzam's legacy and the innovations that he brought to the concept of jihad.
I didn't get the question.
I was taking the example of a classical religious authority like Imam Abu Hanifa and asking what you thought he would make of the legacy of the intellectual innovations in the concept of jihad undertaken by Abdullah Azzam.
This is exactly, jumping from Abu Hanifa to Sheikh Abdullah Azzam, it's 700 years. In my experience, I'm living this today. I come across with some quotes less than 50 seconds in the internet, especially Zawahiri using it, where Sheikh Abdullah Azzam, I was with him in '85, he was answering a question through a lecture of 1 hour. When some people used to call Mujahideen, Afghan Mujahideen, terrorist or ashrar. So he was trying to explain, saying in his word, if defending your land to liberate your land from the occupiers, Soviets, if you call that terrorism, I am the first terrorist. That was in that context in Afghanistan, and to finish in Afghanistan. But to use it now, because Sheikh Abdullah Azzam now, many young Muslims using his legacy for recruitment, and then bringing just this word from a lecture of 1 hour. So this is this one kind of the challenges if you come to young Muslim, less experience, feeling humiliated, remote control in his hand, watching what is going on in Gaza, in Abu Ghraib, in Iraq, this here and there, and automatically his anger goes up. So behind him there is no scholar, no expert, no an Islamic center, no a movement making things in priorities and putting things in order. The fiqh al-awlawiyat, as we say it, the fiqh al-awlawiyat and the priorities on. And then he will make it simple, react to defend Islam, to break the humiliation in his level, in his mind, in his own way. And then the first target, it could be a journalist, could be a boss, or anything. So this, for what? Trying to do this in order to meet the Prophet after this operation. Immediately after I do this, I will meet the Prophet. And then no one can stop him, no one can, because you are not dealing with someone, an agent, or someone corrupt wants to do that operation, and the group of the mafia or the government told him, when you finish that operation, and then you will see the amount, £2 million will appear in your account. So he wants to stay alive to join the 2 million pound. No, he's not doing it for like that. It's your 2 million or your position to tell him when you finish we'll make you the general director of the company. He's not doing it for that. He's doing it for one purpose. When I die, I go to paradise. Now, no one can stop him, change his mind, except someone to tell him, no, if you do it in this way, in this circumstance, you are not going to paradise. And who is that? He's a scholar with credibility.
I'm going to take a few questions from the floor. So there are some questions from individuals who've submitted them early on. The first is from Aziz Rajab Ali. Could Aziz Rajab Ali stand up and ask his question, if he's here? No. Next question is Ben Walker. Would Ben Walker like to ask his question?
Assalamu alaikum. Is this working? And given that the concept of martyrdom is so central to the origins of Shia Islam, and given that the Iranian government was probably the first state to call people to jihad, why do the panel think that acts of extremism and neo-jihad, in inverted commas, are now overwhelmingly being waged by those claiming to be Sunni?
Did everyone hear that on the panel? Shall I repeat it? Is that clear? Okay, I'll just repeat that. So, given that the concept of martyrdom is so central to the origins of Shia Islam, and given that the Iranian government was probably the first state to call people to jihad, why do the panel think that acts of extremism and neo-jihad are now overwhelmingly waged by those claiming to be Sunni?
Can I comment on this first, please? Because very simply, in essence, I think the concept of jihad is not being used in a religious sense here. I think it's being used as a motivating factor to legitimize a political campaign for whatever reason it is. So whether it's Shias using it initially and now it's been taken over by Sunni groups, whether it's your mom telling you to quit smoking, which is now a jihad, everybody's using jihad. The J word is the word to use nowadays if you want to get arrested, right? But that's ultimately the point where it serves a really powerful purpose and kind of appeals to people's emotions at the most significant and highest of levels because it engages them religiously. So I think it may have been introduced by the Iranians or the Shias, but I don't think sects have anything to do with it per se. That's what I would say.
Well, there are a couple of things. First, Iran did not use or sort of initiate, the jihad as a sort of methodology or ideology in '79. I mean, a lot of states, as I said before, have been using it. Algerian used it, Pakistani used it. You name a state and they've used it, and there are a lot of groups who've used it. So Iran comes quite late into it, and it uses. I don't think it's about martyrdom either, and why people want to be martyred or shaheed. It is not about being martyred, it's about fighting, as Rizwan was saying. It's not about seeking Jannah or thereafter, which some of them still do join up for. But the initial thoughts of the things that goes behind you is to avenge, the revenge factor, that you are able to do things through the medium of jihad. So jihad is not, just a very simple platform to be martyred for. It is a platform that first seeks to engage the enemy, then seeks to sort of avenge one's own grievances, and then you therefore, in the end, if you die, you're a shaheed, a martyr. If you don't, you're a ghazi. And I don't, Shia's Islam has had the shaheed or martyrdom concept for a long time, but I think it's not about, as I said before, about the concept of being martyred or not martyred. It's about the concept of fighting, and fighting what you see about your legitimate interests, and the Iranian state uses it. So does, on the other side, Gulf countries use it as well to further their interests. So organizations use it. So it's very complex enough.
Thank you. Our next question is from Ahmet Demaratas. It's coming. This is the last question. Yeah. Is Ahmet here? If not, we can open up to the. Sorry, you Ahmet? No. You'd like to ask a question? Sure. We've got a few questions. I'll come to you next, Christian.
Hello, assalamu alaikum. Thanks for a very interesting talk. Gay Eaton once described jihad in the context of holy war as to protect something that's holy or sacred. So if we look at the geopolitics and the injustices that's going on around the world, then who has the responsibility to fill in this power vacuums, and who will protect the issues that the Muslims hold sacred? You mentioned Gaza. So we don't have to have an ideological discussion about the injustice that's taking place there. But jihad in a Western context always seems to come to the fore when it affects Western people or people in the West. But when thousands or hundreds of thousands are being killed in the East, it's not so relevant there. So who has the responsibility to protect what is sacred to the Muslims and to fill this power vacuum that's going on, or this Pandora's box that kicked off as a result of the wars?
Thank you.
Can I just come to this?
Yeah.
Actually, if you read our report, we've actually engaged on the very question. Well, we've written in terms of explaining neo-jihadism at the look. Traditionally, the jihad, was the responsibility of the state armies. I mean, if you look very superficially, I studied, for instance, at once the jihad between the Byzantine Empire and the Muslims on the other side, whether it was Abbasid or Umayyads before. And the jihad was just simply used for a kind of diplomatic tool to gain some certain kind of benefits. So whenever a new prince was about to be escalated to Khalifa, or on the other side, if some certain Byzantium people wanted some discounts or sort of trade benefits, you start a small campaign. They call it crusade, you call it jihad, and there you go. Things are fine, and your prince is trained, and everything is okay. In the contemporary society, the jihad, basically, the question is bigger: who represents Islam, who represent Muslims? And the state armies, or the Islamic states, not talking about Islamic State, the Muslim countries, rather, they supposedly should be using or invoking jihad, but nobody has a theory of war. I mean, what we're talking about is much more theoretical debate. Jihad is a theory of war. I mean, it has been prevalent for the last 1400 years in the Muslim world. It is changing. And if you're not going to engage on that level, whether you're a policymaker or whether you are a general, underpinning and undertaking what your theory for has been for the last 1400 years, or evolving it, or even dismissing it at all and picking up on Western theory for, then it is for anyone's taking. And this is where the jihadists come in. They fill in the gap as jihad as a theory of war, and they then legitimize jihad for their own purpose. Then they mobilize people that, look, nobody's fighting jihad as it is. It is the theory of war. It is the just war that Muslims have to fight, like you mentioned, Gaza. Therefore, we must invoke it. So if, it's a sort of in a kingdom of blind, one-eyed man is a king kind of thing. So if nobody else in the Muslim world has intellectual capacity or leadership or vision to see things as they are, then you're going to leave it blank to anyone's basically, and that's where jihadists come in. And this is where neo-jihadists are very good. They come in and they pick the slack. That's very simple as that.
I think also another mention to another challenge, which is many parts in the West putting all in one box, or everyone fighting that he's a mujahid and putting him in a negative list. I've been asked this question. We have to make difference between, as I say it in Arabic, sahib qadiyya, someone have no qadiyya. A mujahid with a cause or a movement, and a movement with no cause. So I remember when Mas'ud signed the ceasefire for 1 year with the generals of the Soviets in the Panjshir Valley, it was clear the demands from the generals of the Soviets and the demands from Mas'ud. The conditions is very clear, 1, 2, 3, 4, the period is limited, and even now, the movement of Hamas, if you see it with Ismail Haniya or Khalid Mash'al, and say, what do you want? What your demands to stop fights? He can put it in 5, 6, 7 points and negotiate it and pass it to UN, to Security Council. And even I am Sunni, for example, the other side, Hezbollah, you can imagine he has his cause. But it's not only challenge to the West, even challenge to me as a Muslim. When I see as Al-Qaeda saying, so if I could imagine myself calling Zawahiri to London or to Washington DC and saying, okay, tell me your demand. Just لتكون كلمة الله هي العليا. I want to see the flag of Islam up. That's fine. To how, based on what to negotiate with you. So that's why, for example, another example of this, just fight for fight, which is Taliban Pakistan. Completely different to Taliban of Afghanistan. I am part of the peace talks in Afghanistan, working for that the initiative for the last 5, 6 years. Visited Afghanistan many times. I met Taliban's former Mujahideen, Karzai before he left the palace. So you can fix the demands 5, 6, 7. So this is from the Americans, this is from Karzai, this is from Panjshiris, from the former Mujahideen, this is from Mullah Omar. But if you go to Waziristan and talk to Taliban in Pakistan, so what's your demand to stop? Nothing. For example, Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb, Belawar in Algeria. So if I could secure your passage and bring you here or to Algeria and want to talk to you to put off your arm, what is your demand? So democracy is kufr, election is kufr, constitution is kufr. So this is the challenge. Is not only challenge coming from the West, putting every mujahid in one box, and also from our side. So from the first day when Al-Jawlani in Syria gave bay'ah to Al-Zawahiri, I appeared in my channel TV, I said this is catastrophe. Zawahiri, no one knows where is Zawahiri. How he knows how many Alawi, how many Nusayri, how many groups, how to lead on the ground jihad. So this is the challenges. So that's why we should not, sorry, I took a long time, to know a mujahid with a cause, a movement fighting for a cause, and then its goals to be achieved after 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, and you know what is it. And someone just fighting to see the flag of La ilaha illallah up. Even me, as a Muslim, I'm struggling how to understand what you are saying. So this is just, I wanted to mention this in order not to put everything in one box. That's it.
Thank you.
Who will fill the vacuum was essentially the question, right? I think political Islam will. I think there seems to be an element of confusion between illiberal democracy and liberal democracy, and I think that the Western democratic world needs to recognize that democracy can be illiberal, but it can still be democratic. But what Western democracies actually do is they reveal their hypocrisy when it comes down to real democracy taking hold. So you have a prime example in Egypt where Morsi wins the election, takes power, you have the people, the majority on his side, yet we have the revolution does a 360-degree U-turn, and we now have General Sisi. The world cuts its ties off and makes Gaza into the biggest prison camp, in open-air prison camp, I should say. It's a bit luxurious like that in the world. So there is a hypocrisy and a confusion about what democracy actually is. Democracy can be illiberal, and I think that concept may well have an increasing element of support throughout the Islamic world, especially with the kind of more inequality and difficulties that increase. And I think there's going to be one movement that will come out on top of this, and I think it's the Ikhwan, because I think the Hizbis or Hizb ut-Tahrir, they are too busy talking about minute intellectual points to really have any kind of, they have an agenda, they have a program, sure, and they have some good intellectual ideas, but I don't think they are developed, and they are too busy lost in minute issues. And I think if one organization is to have any impact, obviously now it's going to be difficult with Sisi in power, but I think the Ikhwan and the Brotherhood, or the Brotherhood,
Can I just go
will be a significant player, basically.
Very basic.
Very briefly, because I want to take some more questions from the floor. Yeah.
Having worked with and advised different groups and understanding the way different Ikhwan groups operate, there's a lot of difference in theory and practice, what you're saying. Ikhwan doesn't have a clear idea what they want to do. They have a very good platform, they have people who support them, they have a grassroots support. When it comes to the crunch, when it comes to creating a vision, what Abdullah was talking about, that's simply missing, and we see replicated into different conflicts through Syria, Iraq, into Libya, and even Egypt. So if the political vacuum was going to fill by anyone, we don't know who is going to fill it. Sure. It is for anyone's taking, and Ikhwan had a clear chance to do that. They had a support behind them, but practically they haven't really demonstrated anything. Just wanted to pick up on that.
Well, and the odds were against them as well.
Let's stick to neo-Jihadism and UFA for time, because I don't want to throw the Ikhwan into the same bag as ISIL or Al-Qaeda. I think it's really important that we keep.
That's why I called it political Islam, not militant Islam. Sure. Because there's a difference. I'm going to take 2 questions at a time now, so we can start getting them in. So if I could take the 2 questions from the ladies at the front, so Christiane and the lady behind her, yeah. Has a mic for you.
In the middle already answered my first question, which was what are they fighting for? Because you were saying they're all out there just to fight, and that's the whole point of it. But what are they actually fighting for? You just said to raise the flag, and that's it. There's no more particular political mission behind it that you can understand. So my other question is, what do you experts recommend could be done to stop the young people in Europe going out to Syria to fight for the flag? Any good ideas?
Great, and if you could just pass the mic to the lady behind you. Oh, you've got one, okay, great.
I got it.
Well, thank you for your presentation. What I have got is, yes. Well, one thing what I gathered is the first speaker is saying that ISIS doesn't have ideological depth, although all their actions are based on tradition books, and that is clear with the souk for Jawari ma malakat aymanukum. They were saying that clearly, and beside their burning of books, you know, which recent act, which again, if you will look in depth into the ideological, you know, traditional book, you find a precedent there. The other speaker on the left, which you said that it is politics, not ideology. What I would like to correct you, I think it is using ideology, no, using politics to revive ideology, because the way they have used the ideology in such a way to recruit and to fight. But what I liked most is the middle.
Could we have it in the form of a question, please? We don't need
well, my question is that, just a sec, because you were saying that should we remain prisoner of the past, and you said again another thing, it is a challenge to me as a Muslim. The problem is that how we can open a debate, a true debate, while we are in a state of denial, how we can open a real debate without somebody saying, I am a kafir. I mean, in simple words, I mean, would you believe, for instance, in women's rights as equal as all of these things, how we can start a debate?
Okay, so if we start with those two, and then I'll take another two questions after that. Yeah, I've got, yeah. What? So if you could address both questions and try and keep your answers as brief as possible so that we can get all the questions in. Yeah. Yeah.
What should be done? People are going over to Iraq and Syria to fight because I think cultural alienation, disenchantment, socioeconomic issues have more of a role to play, which are then fed upon and preyed upon by certain people who want to take these people away and convince them to give away their life for a greater cause. You cannot take me away to Iraq and Syria and pick up a Kalashnikov. I have enough going for myself. But if I didn't have enough going for myself, and I find myself being constantly discriminated and constantly subjected to abuses, etc., I'm not saying that I would go over to Iraq and Syria. I'm saying that the likelihood of me wanting to go over to Iraq and Syria may well increase. So the best thing to do in this case is to address the socio-economic and political grievances that people have. Secondly, what needs to happen is there needs to be a recognition in terms of just war. Not all acts of violence against state actors is terrorism. International law recognizes that there is a time and a place in order to use armed force against a nation state. And I think the use of armed force against Assad in Syria is a relatively well-documented case of just war, you could argue. So there is nothing in theory that is wrong with people going over to Iraq and Syria to fight. In fact, we, as in the UK and other Western democracies, have been providing support to the rebels, the moderate rebels, we should say. So the point is that we are supporting fighting, we are supporting war. It's just the issue of, are these returning fighters going to threaten us? Well, the key thing to remember is that war and conflict is extremely stressful, psychologically, mentally, physically. And what we actually need to be doing is reintegrating these members back into society in the same way that the Danes are doing as we speak today, rather than criminalizing them and actually kind of reinforcing the ideas that regardless of what we do, wherever we do it, the West is out to get us, and that's why we're sat in prison. So reintegration of foreign fighters, and also recognizing that terrorism isn't always a bad thing, but is actually recognized under international law. So they're just a few things that can be done. In terms of the political being used to, the comment about the political being used to reignite the ideological, the political and the ideological are intricately connected. The ultimate purpose is political. You cannot say that the cause for why these people are fighting is ideological. You have to contextualize that in the history of, through, I would say, from the start of the 1900s, the collapse of the British Empire and the rise of American power throughout the Middle East and all the rest of it. That is responding, resistance, and I would call acts of aggression and violence a form of resistance against Western hegemony in that part of the world. I'm not saying it's justified or it's legitimate, but I would say, as people who are striving for power, They are resisting power. That's how power works. You have the power, then you have people who resist the power. And they are ultimately trying to gain control of a region in order to have a rule that is based on whatever doctrine it may well be, but is ultimately political. And for that reason, I think politics is the driving factor. Thank you.
So, sorry, just before we come to you, I think I just want to clarify two things. I think one of the points that you made was one does have to be clarified, which is you said that in the context of Syria, it could, what gets called terrorism, you were saying might not be perceived as such because of the fact that the UK has given support to moderate rebels. But of course, it is illegal to join forces fighting in Syria. I mean, just so everybody in this room is absolutely clear on that, we wouldn't want anybody to go away thinking that you can legitimately do that. And also, I think it's worth pointing out that the core concern, of course, is that there are a lot of fighters that do go out there with perhaps noble intentions, end up joining the only forces that are taking Western fighters, and they tend to be Al-Qaeda affiliated groups who then obviously young people end up getting caught up in much more radical groups than perhaps they'd originally intended. So just want to put that caveat out there so it doesn't, so everyone's clear. I'll pass on to Abdullah.
I always try to put myself in the safe side when I answer like these questions, what should be done? What is the solution? Not to give the impression that the solution is here. I will give it to you in 5 minutes. No, that's not. Yes, that's it's for example, let me see, it's a big topic, and from one side the West, from the other side anonymous young Muslims, which is, it's much more deeper than that. For example, if I was there to get good preparation to answer the question after 5 or 10 years, to solve the problem, firstly, these Arab regimes, this is a big jump, needs to understand this context. I am sure if you ask the Prime Minister of Algeria or the Chief of Army, Gaid Saleh, he will never understand one line of what you are saying. If, as we just mentioned before, Sisi just trying to simplify it in just one line. Can you imagine a ruler having that amount, big army in his hand under his order, that big amount of money, population, even in Algeria, and then they are out of the game what is going on in this civilization struggle. So that's why it's above of the ability of Islamic Center or a sheikh here or a former mujahid, or we are trying our best. So that's why I think it comes together, democratize Middle East through not dictatorship and not through this movement. It's that deeper. It's that deeper. Sorry.
Do you want to come back briefly? Yeah.
Briefly. Well, what you're talking about basically is two things: de-radicalization and the program we were mentioning before, DDR, disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of militias. We've been working 2.5 years in DDR. I'm not going to say much in front of Omar, he's an expert. But simply the paradigms and the methods used in the DDR proper or SSR, security sector reform, have proven to simply fail. On one hand, I've given already example of Afghanistan, I've given example of Iraq. You go there through a Western perspective, doing things. This is a simple, we're making the same mistake in terms of counterterrorism, de-radicalization strategy. You presume that there is a kind of social contract in place, like we do have here between the state and the society. There isn't. The people do not really consider themselves a citizen as we do here. They are, not fed by the state. They're cared by their relatives, their tribes they live in. There's no kind of social contract. Those institutional building and those kind of things, the Western paradigms of expecting the citizen to behave in such manner do not really exist in much of the Islamic societies. And this is where the DDR and SSR has failed. You try to create a person or an army that looks Western, wears this kind of Western clothes, but it's not Western. It's just the Afghan army within it. It's the Iraqi armies with all these cultural, tribal issues. Unless you really address the core of that problem, you're not going to understand, or you're not going to be able to bring about some change. I mean, within Islam, we have practice of justice, adl wal ihsan, where justice is adl and ihsan is excellent. We've been using it throughout the 1400 years of our own legacy. That need to be simulated. De-radicalization, again, have proven to be failed because they come strongly from the perspective that you're explaining. So there is a merger of these DDR and de-radicalization problems. And I was speaking to my colleague Sam here earlier on a very similar topic. And I think there is no sort of quick solution or quick fixes. It needs to be a much more comprehensive project, as Abdullah mentioned. But the essence of the issue is empowerment. The Saudis have had a de-radicalization program. So you prevent somebody to be de-radicalized. You put them in a camp 6 weeks, and presumably they're not de-radicalized, and then you control them in a sort of environment. It doesn't work like this. You really need, people who are going there are highly politically motivated. They understand the grievances, they understand concerns, and you need to channel those in some kind of positive way. And that comes through emancipation, that comes through participatory politics, and that comes through empowerment. I think empowerment is the key word here.
And certainly some irony in the Saudis seeking to rehabilitate, but we'll leave that for another day. Last two questions from the floor. I'm going to take from the gentleman back here and the gentleman here. Yeah, sorry. So, can we start with you?
That's fine.
No mic? Anybody?
Sam?
Now, what I think is going on.
Can we have it as a question?
No, that's fine. Yeah. It's a very complex topic.
Sure.
A very complex topic. Now, what I believe is going on is an ideological war from not us and them, not East versus West, but there is a motion to try to eradicate religious rule. It's been going on a lot longer than the threats of terrorism, than the threats. It's been going on for eons. Its latest target now is Islam. I mean, most of the Western world now is secular, where they were once Christian. And the motion is trying to do the same, I believe, in one of the last strongholds of an Abrahamic religious faith, which is the Muslim world.
Which motion, sorry?
This ideological push, so where you have, there's so many varied points, so where you have, society being pushed away from where intellectuals believe that if you think that you believe in a God, that you're somehow intellectually inferior in the West, that sort of thing. That sort of progression that goes on, where if you have faith in a God that has doctrine of rule, you don't want your society or your government to be ruled by what most people in the West would now think is an imaginary being. Alhamdulillah, I'm Muslim. Let's just want to put that out there.
So, and how would you relate that to the neo-Jihadist movement?
The neo-Jihadist movement is a reaction to, well, most struggles are political in nature, as I agree with some of the speakers here. But that's a reaction because the policies that are being imposed, I think, are trying to destabilize places like these.
Okay, so if I could just recap your question. The question is neo-jihadism a reaction to a broader societal push to eliminate religion from the public sphere? Would that be a fair assessment of your question?
That's a fair assessment, and then...
Sorry, I'm gonna have to move on to the next question.
I know. Sorry.
Yeah.
My question as well is, with the call for trying to get democracy in these places, does that not open the floor for those to sweep in and undermine good democracy with the democracy that takes place, for instance, now in Egypt?
Okay, all right, I'll leave that to the speakers. The next question was from the gentleman who's got the mic. Thank you.
My question is about the whole concept of neo-jihadism. I think we have to put it in its right context. We are not asking the right question. If you remember...
Can you make yours a question rather than a statement?
I beg your pardon?
Can you make yours a question rather than
I'm going to ask a question, I have to put it into context, if I may. Because otherwise we're not going to understand the question.
As quickly as possible then, please.
Just, okay. The beginning of the Arab Spring was not in 2011, it was in 1989. If you remember, there was a great revolt, uprising by the people in Algeria. And immediately there were free elections, and the Islamic Party won the elections with a landslide, not once but twice successively, at the local election and at the parliamentary elections. What happened? The French stepped in and they led a coup d'etat. They put their people in power, and the whole democratic process stopped. Immediately after that, what did we have? We have the rise of a group called the Islamic armed groups that were killing and maiming, disemboweling women, and killing, cutting babies into pieces.
Yes, there's a very bloody civil war that's enduring, we might
say.
Exactly.
What I'm getting at is that a group of people saw that this is a new thing in Muslim society. It never happened before. I myself was a journalist at the time, and I was up and down the country here trying to show a different facet, but the media machine was all against it. For them, it was an Islamic group, and the whole state was behind that thing. What happened is that a group of Algerian independent people here in the UK went to study why is it that so-called Islamic groups are killing and maiming the people who supported them in the first instance. And they found that the experience of France in Indochina created the GCMA, groups that would go and kill and maim the population, those very people who used to support General Giap, who was fighting for the independence of Vietnam. Then there was the Robert Mugabe's Zanla movement. I'm putting it in context, but it's very important to understand what's going on, so that you know what neo-jihadism is today. It's important to say that, otherwise nobody will understand.
I'm sure the panel will do a fantastic job in explaining.
Okay, I'm just putting into consideration because I lived that period, and I'm just going to put it in context. Then they started counterinsurgency in Rhodesia under Ian Smith. There was the groups called Sailor Scouts who were going around maiming people and dressing like the Zanla movement, which belonged to Robert Mugabe at the time. And people did not understand. It took them a long time to understand that the people who were killing them were not really those people whom they were supporting. So much now, we understand from a lot of deserters from the Algerian security services that those Islamic armed groups were in fact groups created by the Algerian and French people within the Algerian security services.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting, but I'm going to have to cut you off there. Sorry, the time is definitely up. I'm going to let the panel
This is what people want to listen to. So now ISIS...
Sorry, could you... I'm going to ask you to please stop talking. I'm really sorry. If you could just respect what I've requested. Thank you. So if the panel would like to respond, I did give you several chances to get to the question, to what we've heard. Thank you. Sorry, could we just, sorry, I'm sorry, it's not a debate, it's a panel, and you were meant to ask a question, but thank you. Rizwan.
No, you go first, Rizwan.
Mr. Rashid is mentioning, we followed the Arab Spring, started from Tunisia, that Arab Spring, really happened in '89 in Algeria, more than 23 years ago. And then the same repeated in Algeria, where when the generals cancelled the election and illegalized the political party who won the election, and then the chaos started from that time between someone angry because he not anymore believe in peacefully change, and another behind him trying to use him for his goals. So that immediately within 5, 6, 7 years, we are talking now about 250,000 lives lost. So there is no guarantee. Maybe another rulers can repeat the same what happened in Algeria, because how to deal with extremism or with terrorism or with neo-Jihadists, call it what you want, it's completely different how Mubarak or Gaddafi or Zain al-Abidin will approach it. And here, this kind of meetings will never happen in Cairo. In order to understand exactly what is going on, there is a serious paper to Al-Azhar between the journalists, or in Algeria, even what's so-called some scholars visiting some members of Al-Qaeda inside the prisons in Saudi. It was just very superficial. Just they want to make sure, is the King Abdullah is Wali al-Amr or not? Is he Islamically legitimate ruler or not? If that prisoner agreed for that, so it's fine. So it's not comprehensive, not deep, not scientific. So that's why this struggle or this conflict will never stop from the Arab world, because the rulers in there, they wanted just to solve the problem, to stay in power. For them, a negotiation or a talk or between civilizations, between the international market, international security, that is not, doesn't exist in their mind. They wanted just to do it in order to make them believe that I stay in power. If they want money, I will give them white check. If they don't like, kill them. So this is why the gap, it's a big gap. Big big nation with big resource are absent of the debate because of those rulers. So this is what I'm trying to say.
If the other two speakers want to just very briefly address the last two questions.
The question at the back was, is ISIS a response to an anti-religious, a growing tide of anti-religious sentiment? Partially, but I think more than a response, I think this is a two-stranded answer, and I'll keep it short and sweet. One is ISIS are trying to project themselves to be a significant world power. The speed, the sophistication with which they've taken over the swathes of territory that they have indicates that to some extent. They're good. I mean, the Iraqi army, former Ba'athists, form a significant part of ISIS. So for that reason, they have good expertise when it comes down to combat operations. So they clearly are trying to, one, project themselves as a significant power, but secondly, it's not a response to secularism, it's an alternative to secularism. And I think this is the key point that needs to be kind of said. I remember reading Sayyid Qutb's Milestones many years ago, and one of the things that he said is that Islam does not have an ability to compete with Western civilization when it comes down to science and technology. The West is far ahead and far advanced, but what it does have to offer the Western world is something greater, is something beyond science and technology, and that is belief and ideas and values. So it's almost like Qutb's promoting an intellectual revolution that will kind of supersede the scientific and technological innovations made by the West. So in sum, the answer to your question, I would say, rather than being a response, I would say it's an alternative format. accepted that it's an extremely bloody, violent and complicated, conflict, but I would say it's an alternative rather than a response.
And if we could just end with yourself.
Thanks. I think, if I'm correct, you were coming at, I'm not going to ask you, but I will presume that you were coming at stating that if Algerian DRS was created, murders in the name of Mujahideen and was infiltrated by the French, therefore IS is also a creation somehow by the West, if that's the presumption. And I've heard this, many times. I've heard this from people, not just by people here. I've heard this from people literally on the ground who are actually there fighting. And I've already explained that is not the case. It's, there is a direct responsibility. If there was no Iraq war, you probably would not have had Al-Qaeda in Iraq, you probably would not have had IS, Islamic State, you probably would not have had the troubles that they're out in. But it's equally the flip side of it, the mutation that happened. If we did not have had the Shia military militia death squads, if you had a bit more open government by the Maliki and political emancipation of the Sunnis, if people in the West reacted positively, or rather took a proactive strategy towards the Arab Revolution and tried to sort out the problem that we face in Syria and negotiate with the people, and should have been negotiating, including Iranians, including people on the ground, including Hezbollah, we wouldn't be in the mess that we are in today. You have to speak to other side, and it is very easy to presume that there is always a Western hand, which sometimes there is direct linked. But there are a lot of mutations, there are a lot of evolutions that are taking place on the ground, and this is what neo-jihadism seeks to study, a kind of a ground-up perspective of how we know what is going on, rather how we presume that is what's going on. What was the question? Sorry, if you can remind me about the gentleman.
About secularism and whether there was a link between the pushback against religion and the emergence of neo-jihadism.
Well, I think I agree there with Rizwan. In terms of ideological terms, and to an extent I would agree that political Islam did have a very good sort of formula, al-Islam huwa al-hal. But until that came to sort of being, Islamists are very good in intellectualizing a lot of debate. But when you get to actually governance and in post-governance level, how do you actualize it into governance? How do you address key questions? Al-Islam huwa al-hal, Islam is the solution, but kaif, how is Islam a solution? How in particular term Islam provides certain solutions? And I think that lack of that experience that obviously comes through, Morsi wasn't given a chance enough to see through. Tunisia, the revolution started, the Islamists come and did actually very well in terms of coming up to a constitution. And the lack of ideologies who are maturing, if you're not going to give them enough chances, and then if you're going to come through a very Western perspective of how you see things, that all this side is completely bad and we are still in a sort of Samuel Huntington kind of dream world, or Fukuyama's that at the end of history, then people who are not people who are not taking up the intellectual debate or not given chances to prove themselves or learn from their mistakes, i.e. the Islamists, then the only people you're going to get is kind of jihadists. And not just jihadists, let's be very, very clear about this. Al-Qaeda, for instance, is today a moderate organization against Dawlat al-Islamiyya, against IS.
Did you just say moderate?
Yeah. If you look superficially of what Al-Qaeda sort of projects and the brutality
on the violent jihad,
jihadism, on what is happening inside Syria.
Yeah.
Al-Qaeda is not my words. Al-Qaeda is by some Americans has been quoted. Al-Qaeda is on that level, is less extreme in its sort of attempts to. Al-Qaeda rules and Al-Qaeda provides security. Jabhat al-Nusra did. Al-Qaeda in Maghrib did. It kind of tries to provide the kind of the environment of a state rather than Islamic State, who just wants to sort of create chaos. So if Al-Qaeda is being, Al-Qaeda is being won over by neo-jihadists. We really need to stand back and think. And that's just, the battle of turf between the traditional jihad or the jihad as we knew it before 9/11 and the neo-jihad. So I think the complexity of a lot of things that is happening on the ground, the Sunni-Shia conflict that is very detrimental to the whole thing, the lack of opportunity for people to mature their ideologies and to mature their experiences in different governments, the lack of political vision that there exists. And I mean, almost everyone doesn't have a very clear idea whether they're Islamist organization or a secular organization, or in between, how they want to see a particular country or the region in, not just 10 years time, but now or tomorrow. And that creates kind of space, and once you couple that with the kind of Western perception of things, that gives a room to maneuver to neo-jihadists. And as I said before, you're not going to be able to counter neo-jihadism militarily, because you are unable to take militarily on one, how long has been now the Boko Haram has kidnapped the girls? What have we done as the West militarily? You cannot defeat an ideology by military terms. You cannot defeat or be engaged in multiple wars at one time. There's a limit. You're overstretched. There needs to be a comprehensive strategy that understands what's going on, and that basically then addresses it, looks up through a different perspective.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much to all of you for being here this evening and for your patience. Thank you very much to the panel. I'd like to, just before we leave, invite Ismail Shikday to come and say a few words, hopefully some brief words.
Like waving like a wonder something.
Yeah, come and use this if you want.
Do we have to twist it or something? Huh? Say a few magic words. Okay, can you hear me? I know just very quickly, I think the acoustics weren't that great this evening, so just bear with me. If you can't hear me, you can grab me later. I just want to say thank you to Miriam and thank you to all the guests for a wonderful and very insightful discussion today. It just sounds like ISIS never played Risk. I think that's what it sounds like. But we can talk about that later. But just a couple of shameful plugs I think I'd just like to mention. The first one is saying thank you to the two organisers, IISA and City Circle. So IISA, obviously the Islamic Institute of Strategic Affairs. If you want to know more about them, you can sign up to their mailing list for their weekly newsletter and further information about their programs. A full report on neo-Jihadism will be uploaded tomorrow on their website. They currently have a couple of vacancies for researchers and a social media manager as well, so please get in touch or see a member of staff, and I know a few of them are sitting on the front row as well. So I just want to say a very quick thank you to Usama, who was a fantastic help in organising this particular event. So Usama, can you please just put your hand up? Thank you very much. Another shameless plug too, just very quickly about City Circle, who were the other organisers tonight. Now, City Circle, obviously, as mentioned at the start of the debate, is a voluntary-led charity, and it's been going on for a while now. It's been going on since 1999. And their aim is to foster debate like we had today, to get people like yourselves engaged in local communities and local projects. And the three main projects which City Circle are carrying out since 1999 one of the main ones is the Saturday School, and that's a fantastic project which helps underprivileged and kids from poorer backgrounds. It provides them with a role model with Saturday education in maths, English and Islamic studies, and that's been going on for a while now, and that's based in Westbourne Grove. And we teach kids every Saturday from about 10 o'clock to about 1:30, maths, English and Islamic studies, and it's a fantastic, I'm part of it. I teach I've been teaching there for the last 5 years, and it really is an exceptional project. And if you'd like to get in touch, if you'd like to take part in that particular project, then come and see myself, or come and see anyone on the front row who's also taking part in that, or volunteers for that particular project as well. The second project, which City Circle also take part in, is the homeless charity project, and we do this in collaboration with another charity called Children of Azzam, and what that aims to do is provide and distribute clothing and food to homeless people in Lincoln's Inn Field in Holborn every Sunday from about 5:30 till about 7 o'clock. So again, if you'd like to take part in that particular project, then come and see myself or anyone sitting on the front row, or Ramiz, I think he's going to be hanging around here afterwards for that particular project. Lastly, there's the debate every Friday, and that's off Edgware Road, and that's kind of like an extension of what we discussed today. We talk about current affairs, we talk about anything that kind of matters in society at the moment, and that's for Muslims and non-Muslims, and that's obviously free of charge. And the reason why it's free of charge, I mean, all volunteers take part in this charity, okay? No one gets paid. And the reason why we can set up these projects, these wonderful initiatives, is because people like you donate. We receive voluntary contributions every month to actually fund these projects and help create and kickstart new projects. And what I'd like to ask each and every one of you, if you can, is to help us improve City Circle, promote the charity, raise awareness, become part of the local community, help the people who are poorer than you in London and the UK. And you can do this by signing up to the website, by filling in a standing order form, which I think is on most of the chairs. I'm asking for anything, £5 a month, £10 a month, anything will do, anything that you can spare out of your own pocket that can help City Circle create new initiatives and new projects and help most of the poorer people in London. That would be great. I mean, if you'd like to know more about the charity, then please come and see myself, come and see, I know Arsen's here, and there's a few other people on the front row who've also been part of this wonderful charity. That's all I'd like to say. There was also a hashtag for tonight, hashtag CC Jihadism. So if you've got any more questions, post it to hashtag CC Jihadism. I know it sounds more like an Egyptian-backed government hashtag, really. I think we've probably got to rebrand this Twitter thing here, I think. But anyway, okay, so that's enough for me. I'll pass you back over to Miriam. Jazakallah, thank you very much.